One of the most powerful illusions humanity has ever accepted is the idea that the universe is far away, distant stars, remote galaxies, vast empty space separating us from everything else. This belief is so deeply embedded that it feels self-evident, almost unquestionable. And yet, it may be the most misleading assumption of all. Distance, as we understand it, is not just physical, it is psychological. It shapes how people relate to reality, responsibility, and existence itself. When the universe is framed as distant, it becomes irrelevant. What happens out there feels disconnected from what happens here. Space becomes a backdrop rather than an environment, something to observe, not something to exist within. This framing quietly removes the universe from daily life, reducing it to images, data, and abstractions. And once distance is accepted, interaction feels impossible. But this sense of distance is learned, not discovered. It is reinforced through language, education, and imagery. The universe is always out there, never here. Even the word space implies emptiness between things, rather than something continuous. This linguistic framing matters. What feels far away feels powerless. What feels distant feels uninvolved. And what feels uninvolved does not need to be considered deeply. Yet when examined closely, this idea begins to fracture. Light from distant stars is here now. Gravitational influence crosses space without delay. Fields extend everywhere at once. At no point is there a clean boundary between here and there. The universe does not begin beyond Earth's atmosphere. It continues through it, through the planet, through the body, through perception itself. Ancient cultures understood this intuitively. They did not experience the sky as distant. They experienced it as present. The heavens were not somewhere else. They were above, around, and within the rhythm of life. Celestial movements guided agriculture, ritual, and meaning. The universe was not something to escape to. It was something to live inside. Modern thinking reversed this relationship. By placing the universe at an unreachable distance, humanity was placed alone at the center of relevance. This felt empowering at first. It gave humans dominance over a dead mechanical cosmos. But it also created isolation. A universe that is far away cannot respond, it cannot interact, it cannot matter beyond physics. The shock comes when this distance collapses. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but conceptually. When you realize that the universe is not something you look at, but something you are inside, everything changes. Proximity replaces separation. Participation replaces observation, and responsibility quietly returns. This chapter is not suggesting the universe is physically closer in the way objects move nearer. It is suggesting that closeness was never about distance at all. It was about relationship, about whether reality is something that happens around us or something we are embedded within. Once distance dissolves, the universe stops feeling passive. It no longer feels like a silent stage. It begins to feel like a system, vast, structured, and responsive. Not watching in a human sense, but interacting in ways we are only beginning to remember. This is why the illusion of distance matters. Because as long as the universe feels far away, nothing about it feels relevant to who we are or how we live. But when that illusion weakens, the universe becomes immediate again, present, close. And once the universe feels close, the idea that it is indifferent becomes harder to maintain. The universe doesn't need to move closer. It already surrounds you. The only thing that moved away was our attention. When people hear the phrase, the universe is watching, the mind immediately imagines eyes, intention, surveillance, something human projected outward. But that instinct is part of the misunderstanding. Observation does not require a watcher in the human sense. Systems observe through interaction. They register through response. They watch not by looking, but by reacting. And once this distinction is understood, the idea becomes far more unsettling than any image of distant observers. Modern science has already brushed against this truth, though it rarely explores it openly. In quantum mechanics, observation changes outcome. The act of measurement alters behavior. Particles behave differently when observed, not because someone is staring at them, but because interaction has occurred. The system registers participation. Something is no longer isolated. That alone should have shattered the idea of a passive universe, yet the implication is often confined to equations and laboratories safely removed from daily meaning. What this suggests is not that the universe is conscious in a human way, but that it is responsive. Responsive systems do not need awareness as we define it. They require sensitivity, feedback, connection. A thermostat observes temperature without thought. An ecosystem observes imbalance without intention. Observation, in this deeper sense, is simply responsiveness to interaction. If the universe is filled with fields rather than emptiness, then everything within it is constantly interacting. Nothing is truly isolated. Every movement, every exchange of energy, every shift of attention participates in the larger system. In such a universe, observation is continuous because interaction is continuous. The universe does not need to watch you. You cannot avoid interacting with it. This reframes the discomfort many people feel when hearing that reality is watching. The unease does not come from fear of judgment. It comes from the loss of invisibility. A dead universe offers anonymity. An active universe does not. Actions matter beyond immediate consequence. Influence extends beyond visible cause and effect. Ancient cultures understood this intuitively. They did not imagine gods watching from afar like guards. They understood that alignment mattered because the universe responded to alignment. Rituals were not performances, they were interactions. Behavior was shaped by the belief that nothing existed in isolation. Modern culture replaced this with the comfort of distance and detachment. The idea that the universe observes through interaction explains why intention feels powerful even when invisible, why attention shapes experience, why meaning emerges not from isolation but from relationship. These are not mystical claims. They are logical outcomes of a connected system. The real warning in this chapter is not that the universe is monitoring humanity. It is that humanity is never unseen by the system it inhabits, not judged, not recorded, simply registered. Influence leaves traces. Participation has consequences, even when no one is watching in the conventional sense. This changes how responsibility works. In a universe that does not respond, responsibility is optional. In a universe that responds, responsibility is inherent, not moral responsibility imposed from outside, but systemic responsibility, action shaping condition. This is why redefining observation matters, because once observation is understood as interaction rather than surveillance, the universe stops feeling distant and abstract. It feels immediate, present, inescapably close. The universe does not need to look at you to know you are there. Your existence is already participation, and once participation is understood, the idea of a silent, indifferent universe becomes impossible to maintain. Ancient civilizations did not look at the sky and feel separated from it. They felt surrounded by it. The heavens were not an abstract concept or a distant mystery. They were present, immediate, and involved in daily life. The sky was not out there, it was here, moving above them, shaping seasons, time, and meaning. This is why ancient cultures across the world shared a common understanding. The universe was alive, participatory, and attentive, even if not conscious in a human sense. What modern thinking often labels as myth was, in many cases, experiential language. Without modern instruments or mathematical frameworks, ancient cultures described reality through symbol, story, and ritual. But symbols do not arise from nothing. They arise from patterns repeatedly observed. The stars were not worshipped because they were lights in the sky. They were respected because their movements correlated with real effects on Earth, tides, cycles, fertility, and human behavior. Temples, pyramids, stone circles, and sacred sites were aligned with astonishing precision to celestial events. This was not coincidence or aesthetic choice. Alignment mattered because something was believed to respond. When solstices, equinoxes, or planetary movements occurred, rituals followed not to appease distant gods, but to remain in harmony with a larger system. The universe was not watching passively. It was interacting rhythmically. Ancient people did not feel small in the universe. They felt situated within it. Identity extended beyond the body and tribe into the cosmos itself. This sense of participation created responsibility rather than fear. Actions mattered because they echoed into the larger order. Disharmony was not punishment, it was imbalance. The idea of a silent, indifferent universe would have felt absurd to them. A universe that does nothing in response to existence would have been meaningless. Meaning emerged precisely because interaction was assumed. Life was lived in dialogue with the sky, not in isolation beneath it. What is unsettling is how consistent these views were across cultures that never contacted one another. Different names, different symbols, same underlying idea. Space was filled with presence, not emptiness. Presence did not mean personality, it meant influence. The universe affected life, and life affected the universe. Separation was never assumed. This worldview began to fade, not because it was disproven, but because it was inconvenient. As societies centralized, expanded, and sought control, a participatory universe became problematic. A living cosmos implied limits to authority. If reality itself responded, then no ruler, system, or institution could claim total dominance. Declaring the universe distant and dead removed that obstacle. The loss was subtle. Over generations, the sky became background, Stars became objects, ritual became superstition, participation became observation. Humanity traded relationship for distance, and in doing so, gained control but lost orientation. This chapter is not romanticizing the past. Ancient societies were not perfect, enlightened, or free of hierarchy, but their relationship with the universe was fundamentally different. They did not feel alone, and that alone changes how fear, responsibility, and meaning operate. To feel alone in the universe is to feel unobserved, unconnected, and unaccountable beyond immediate systems. To feel surrounded by the universe is to feel held within something larger than oneself. That feeling does not produce panic, it produces humility. The ancient world did not fear a watching universe. It trusted a participating one. And the most unsettling possibility is not that they were wrong, but that they remembered something we were taught to forget. Modern science did not set out to prove that the universe is close, interconnected, or responsive. Yet, that is precisely where its discoveries have led. In attempting to describe reality with greater precision, it has quietly dismantled the very idea of distance it once relied upon. The language remains technical, cautious, and compartmentalized, but the implications are unmistakable. Separation is not as real as we were taught to believe. At the most fundamental level, physics no longer describes reality as a collection of isolated objects moving through empty space. It describes fields, continuous, invisible structures that exist everywhere at once. Particles are not independent things. They are excitations of underlying fields that stretch across the universe. This means that what appears separate is actually connected through a shared medium. There is no clear boundary where here ends and there begins. Quantum entanglement makes this even harder to ignore. Two particles, once connected, remain correlated regardless of distance. Change one, and the other responds instantly. Not faster than light outside the concept of distance entirely. Science explains this mathematically while avoiding the existential conclusion. Distance collapses at the deepest level of reality. Something links separated points without crossing space as we understand it. The observer effect further erodes the idea of detachment. Measurement does not simply reveal reality, it alters it. Observation is participation. The universe responds to interaction. This is not philosophy, it is experimental fact. Yet the consequences are rarely discussed beyond the laboratory. If observation changes outcome, then reality is not independent of awareness. Proximity is not measured in meters, but in interaction. Even gravity, long treated as a force acting across empty space, now appears to behave more like a property of space-time itself. Mass does not pull across a void, it curves the medium everything exists within. Again, space is not empty, it is structure, and structure implies relationship. What is striking is how carefully modern science avoids connecting these dots publicly. Each discovery is treated as an isolated anomaly rather than part of a larger pattern. Fields here, entanglement there. Dark energy somewhere else. The unifying idea that the universe is an interconnected system without true separation remains unspoken. This is not because scientists are hiding the truth, it is because the implications extend beyond science. A universe without true distance undermines the idea of isolation. It challenges the assumption that actions are local and consequences limited. It suggests that interaction is constant even when unseen. If everything exists within a shared field, then nothing happens in isolation. Influence is subtle but real. Participation is unavoidable. And the idea of a passive, indifferent universe becomes increasingly difficult to defend. The shock is not that science proved the universe is watching. It proved something more unsettling. The universe does not need to watch because nothing is ever truly separate from it. There is no outside vantage point, no neutral distance. Everything happens within the system. Ancient cultures lived as if this were true. Modern science now describes a reality that behaves as if it is true. Yet culturally, we still act as if the universe is far away and uninvolved. This chapter is the bridge between ancient intuition and modern discovery. Not revelation, but convergence. Two very different ways of knowing, arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion. Proximity is fundamental. Distance is a convenience. And once proximity is acknowledged, the universe stops feeling distant and abstract. It feels immediate, present, inescapably close. Which leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. If the universe is this close, why is believing you are alone so important to power? That is where the story turns darker. The belief that the universe is distant, silent, and indifferent is not just a scientific assumption, it is a psychological foundation. A population that believes it exists alone in a dead universe is far easier to manage than one that understands it is embedded in a responsive system. Separation is the prerequisite for control. When people feel isolated, meaning must be supplied externally, authority fills the void left by connection. If the universe is far away and uninvolved, then nothing witnesses human action beyond social systems. Responsibility shrinks to legality. Ethics become negotiable. Consequence feels local and temporary. This worldview creates dependence on institutions for meaning, on structures for guidance, on permission for purpose. In a dead universe, power flows downward. But if the universe is close, interconnected, and responsive, then that entire structure weakens. Authority is no longer absolute. Meaning is not centralized. People begin to feel accountable beyond surveillance, not because they are being watched, but because participation implies consequence. That kind of internal accountability cannot be enforced or revoked. It emerges naturally when separation dissolves. This is why narratives of isolation are reinforced so aggressively. Humans are taught that consciousness is confined to the brain, that meaning is subjective, that existence is accidental. These ideas are not proven necessities, they are stabilizing assumptions. They reduce complexity, they prevent uncomfortable questions about participation, influence, and responsibility. A universe that does not respond allows systems to define reality unchallenged. If nothing beyond human authority matters, then rules replace relationship, compliance replaces coherence. Power does not need to persuade, it only needs to regulate. In contrast, a responsive universe undermines that simplicity. It suggests that actions echo beyond visibility, that intention matters even when no one is watching. This is deeply threatening to any structure built on external enforcement. You can regulate behavior, but you cannot easily regulate awareness. You can monitor actions, but you cannot fully monitor attention, intention, or perception. And if perception is the real interface with reality, then power becomes diffuse rather than centralized. The most effective control is not force, it is framing. Teach people they are alone and they will look outward for guidance. Teach them the universe is indifferent and they will accept systems that are indifferent too. The external world becomes a mirror of the internal assumption. This does not require a conspiracy. It is an alignment of incentives, systems that assume separation functions smoothly when people believe separation is real. Questioning that assumption destabilizes the entire framework. The irony is that believing you are alone feels safe. It removes responsibility beyond survival. It shrinks consequence to what can be seen and punished, but it also shrinks meaning. It creates a vacuum that power is eager to fill. This chapter is not claiming that the universe judges humanity. It is claiming something more unsettling, that participation is unavoidable. You are already inside the system, already interacting, already influencing and being influenced. Believing otherwise does not make it untrue. It only makes you unconscious of it. That is why the idea of a close, responsive universe is treated cautiously, dismissed casually, or mocked outright. Not because it is dangerous in itself, but because it restores something that centralized power cannot easily replace: internal reference. Once people stop feeling alone, control must change form. And change in control is always resisted. Which brings us to the final chapter, because realizing the universe is close does not end the story. It begins a choice most people were never told they had. The most unsettling realization is not that the universe is watching, but that there was never a moment when you were outside of it. There is no boundary where observation begins and participation ends. The universe does not move closer. Awareness does. And when that awareness shifts, something irreversible happens. You stop imagining reality as something you look at from a distance and begin experiencing it as something you are immersed in constantly, quietly, without pause. This realization does not arrive as fear. It arrives as stillness, the kind that follows when an illusion dissolves. The need for constant explanation fades. The urge to dominate or escape weakens. What replaces it is a subtle recognition. Nothing is happening to you in isolation. Everything is happening with you inside a system that responds to interaction, not belief. This does not mean the universe judges, records, or monitors in a human sense. It means that participation is unavoidable. Actions, attention, and intention are not sealed inside the body. They ripple outward through the same fields that carry matter and energy. Consequence does not wait for permission. It unfolds naturally, often invisibly, often delayed, but rarely absent. This is why remembering feels heavy. It restores responsibility without assigning blame. It does not threaten punishment. It removes excuses. A responsive universe does not demand perfection. It demands awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable in a culture built on distraction. Most people will not experience this realization suddenly. It will arrive in fragments, a question that lingers longer than expected, a sense of unease when separation feels forced, a quiet discomfort with explanations that insist nothing matters beyond the immediate and visible. These moments are easy to ignore until they accumulate. Once they do, something shifts internally. You stop needing the universe to prove itself. You stop demanding certainty. You begin to notice how often reality responds subtly to alignment and dissonance. Not magically, systemically, cause and effect reappear in places they were once denied. This is where the story becomes personal. Not dramatic, not heroic personal. Two people can live in the same world, under the same conditions, and experience entirely different realities. One feels trapped, watched, and constrained. The other feels situated, attentive, and present. The difference is not what the universe does, it is how awareness meets it. Realizing you are already inside the universe does not remove mystery, it restores it. Mystery stops being something out there and becomes something intimate. The universe is no longer distant enough to ignore, yet not close enough to control. It becomes what it always was, the environment of existence itself. This is the quiet ending few expect. No invasion, no revelation, no collapse, just recognition. The kind that makes old narratives feel thin and new ones unnecessary. You don't need to believe the universe is watching. You only need to notice that interaction never stopped. Once that noticing stabilizes, the illusion of distance never fully returns. You may still live as before, work as before, move through the world as before, but something subtle has changed. You no longer feel alone in a dead universe. You feel present inside a living one. And that changes how you listen, how you act, how you choose. Not because someone is watching, but because you finally realized you were never separate. The universe didn't come closer. You did.